This episode of the Tips for Travellers podcast is supported by DK Eyewitness Travel Top 10 Guides, the best-selling pocket-sized travel guidebooks, with top 10 lists covering destination highlights, a pull-out map, things to do, the best places to dine and drink, and more. DK Eyewitness Travel Top 10 Guides show you the 10 best of everything.
This is Tips for Travellers. Inspiration, advice, and tips on finding and having amazing travel experiences on both land and at sea. Get more tips on must-see and must-do travel at tipsfortravellers.com.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Tips for Travellers podcast, where we take a look at exciting destinations all around the world. And today we're in Japan and we're heading to the city of Hiroshima. Now, unfortunately, Hiroshima is best known as the city that the first atomic bomb was ever dropped in. It was dropped by the United States of America on the 6th of August 1945 at 8:15 a.m. in the morning. And in 2016, in May 2016, President Obama was the first serving US president to actually visit Hiroshima. He flew there to lay a wreath from the G7 summit that was taking place in Japan. He didn't make an apology for the decision to drop the bomb, and the reason for that, I believe, is that many veterans believe that the bomb ended the war early and saved many American lives. And he didn't bow in front of the memorial, but it was a very significant event nonetheless. And I thought I'd just say some of the words that he said, because I think it really sets up the whole Hiroshima and a lot of what I'm going to talk about in the podcast today. So he said, 71 years ago, on a bright, cloudless morning, death fell from the sky and the world was changed. A flash of light and a wall of fire destroyed a city and demonstrated that mankind possessed the means to destroy itself. Why do we come to this place, to Hiroshima? We come to ponder the terrible forces unleashed in the not-so-distant past. We come to mourn the dead. Their souls speak to us and ask us to look inward, to take stock of who we are and what we might become. And that's really the issue with Hiroshima. When you go there, it's a very beautiful city now. It's been reconstructed, but there is so much significance around Hiroshima. And as a tourist, as a visitor, I think the main reason you come to Hiroshima is to really appreciate the story of the atomic bomb, the story of the Second World War. But there are things beyond that, and I will talk a little bit about the city and some of the other things beyond that. But I do think, as you'll see in my tips for travelers, that really going there and spending time dwelling, as President Obama said in that speech, around the significance of Hiroshima and what it has become to symbolize is really a fundamental part of why one comes to Hiroshima itself. So let me just dial back, as I always do, and talk a little bit about the overall history of Hiroshima, and then we'll get into key facts, need to knows, tips for travelers, and must see and do things as we normally do. So the city is a very ancient city. It dates back to the late 1500s. And it was originally established by a very powerful Japanese warlord, a man called Mori Teramoto. And he established Hiroshima, and he built Hiroshima Castle as sort of the center of his power. And over time, it developed into a very important port city. It's got a very significant, very important port, very strategically located. And it grew as a port city both from a commerce perspective but also from a military perspective. So, for example, during the First Sino-Japanese War, the Japanese actually moved their capital to Hiroshima during some of that battle, and the emperor actually used Hiroshima Castle. In the Second World War, Hiroshima was very important. The Second General Army and the Army Marine headquarters were based within Hiroshima. There was very big depots of various supplies, and its port was very important in terms of managing the whole war effort. So up until actually the time of the nuclear bomb, Hiroshima hadn't been bombed that much. So places like Tokyo and other parts of Japan had been very, very heavily bombed. But Hiroshima was actually not particularly bombed until the nuclear bomb was dropped. Now, the nuclear bomb was dropped by a plane which was called Enola Gay. That was the name of the B-52 bomber. And the bomb it dropped was nicknamed the Little Boy. And as I mentioned at the setup, it was dropped earlish in the morning, 8:15 a.m. on the 6th of August 1945. It killed around 80,000 people immediately. Now, no one knows exactly the numbers because so many people were wiped out. It's not down to the last head count, people don't really know, but it was estimated killed around about 80,000 people immediately, but the actual total death toll reached around about 140,000, seems to be the general agreement because of the effects. 70% of the city was destroyed, so pretty much it was wiped out. Now, actually, the problems that Hiroshima had were made even worse because a month later, or just over a month later, on the 17th of September, a typhoon came through. It struck the city. It killed another 3,000 people or injured people. It destroyed a lot of the bridges that weren't already destroyed, and actually damaged a lot of the infrastructure that had remained, like railway and roads. So it had the bomb, and then it was hit by this typhoon. So it really was a very traumatic time. Now, after the Second World War, the Americans actually occupied Japan, and they had very strong censorship around what had really happened in Hiroshima, and particularly the effects of radiation. And although it was known sort of in places like the US and Japan, the information was very strongly controlled, and it didn't really become very clear to the Japanese people overall until after the Japanese regained control of Japan following the San Francisco Peace Treaty, which was in 1951. Now, Hiroshima itself was rebuilt, and it was supported very strongly by the Japanese government. There was a whole act which was called the Hiroshima Memorial City Construction Law. It was passed in 1949, and at that same year, Hiroshima was declared as a city of peace. And as a city of peace, ever since then, it's become a focal place and a symbol where lots of conferences and events and various activities around peace are actually held. So Hiroshima's got this very traumatic past, but it's come to really symbolize and stand as kind of a symbol for peace. So let me carry on and talk about some things you need to know. Hiroshima itself, what does it mean? It means wide island. It's the largest city, and as I've already mentioned, it's a very key port on the biggest of the Japanese island, which is western Honshu. So that's why it was so strategically important. It's a very pretty city. A lot of people nickname it the City of Rivers. There's actually 6 rivers that pass through the city. So these rivers, sort of wind all around the city. It's got 2 World Heritage sites, the Atomic Bomb Dome, which I'll talk about, and the Miyajima Island, which is a very beautiful place. And that's one of the things I'm going to talk about a little bit later, about a real contrast to focusing on the Second World War and the atomic bomb. It's a very important industrial town. It's still very important. It's got the Mitsubishi shipyard, but it's after the reconstruction, it's still very important as an industrial center and a port. The population is just over a million, about 1.1 million. So in terms of overall observations, it's a very pretty city. They've done a great job at really reconstructing and rebuilding it, but it's very hard to get past the significance of Hiroshima, the atomic bomb, and that's still really much, particularly for tourists, is a really focal point, I guess, for people living there and working there. Its significance is not forgotten because it's a big part of what the city is, but of course it's now become a really important overall industrial and port city. It can be very sobering. A lot of it can be focused on, but I think if you're going to Hiroshima, you need to really look at that side. But there are some other much more calming, pleasing, that's the right words, parts of Hiroshima that I want to talk about as well, because I think you need to do both. Otherwise, you come away with probably sort of a pessimistic view of the world. And the damage that was done. So let me talk about visiting information. When's the best time to go? Well, you've got to remember that Japan, it's in the northern hemisphere, so winter's towards the end of the year and summer's in the middle of the year. It's relatively mild, so winters are quite mild. So January's the coldest month. It goes down to about 10 degrees. So it can be a little bit nippy. Summers can be very hot, very humid. August, like in so many places in the northern hemisphere, is the warmest month. It averages around 32 degrees, so it's pretty hot and pretty humid. There's all those rivers, so it is a pretty sticky city to go to. So a lot of people like to say go in spring and autumn time, where the weather's a bit more easy as a tourist. In terms of getting there, lots of options in terms of getting there. You've got Hiroshima Airport. It's about 30 miles from the city. Hiroshima Airport mostly serves Japan, internal flights to Japan, China, very easy to get to, Taiwan, South Korea. So if you're coming in, you're probably going to, and you want to fly to Hiroshima, you're probably going to come via a connecting place within Japan, unless you're coming obviously from China, Taiwan or South Korea. However, what a lot of people do is they come by train, and you've got the bullet train coming into Hiroshima, and it's a very busy, very big hub station. Actually, it's a huge station. The bullet train, the Shinkansen, the Sanyo Shinkansen operates through there, but it's a very large station. It's a very busy station. Lots of the bullet trains. In fact, I used to travel on the bullet train out of the city, but there's a lot of bullet trains passing through. So a lot of people will come to Hiroshima by train, and also cruising is becoming more of a thing. It's growing. There's not a big cruise infrastructure yet, so it tends to be some of the smaller ships. So there's not a big cruise terminal, etc. Certainly at the time of recording this, there wasn't, but it's certainly growing. In terms of getting around Hiroshima, one of the things that it has, which is very distinctive for all the major cities in Japan, is it has a great trolley tram system, and it's very famous for its trolley tram system, and it's nicknamed the Moving Streetcar Museum. And the reason being is that they've got some of the streetcars that actually suffered bomb damage, but what they did is they bought up streetcars from other Japanese cities like Kyoto, for example, as those cities discontinued overground trams in favor of building metros and underground and sort of light urban railways. Now in Hiroshima they can't actually build a metro because underneath it's a bit too sandy, and basically the soil and the ground underneath won't really support building tunnels. So you therefore have this tram system, and it's very extensive. It's become a real symbol of the city. Locals are very proud of it, and it's a great way of getting around because it is so extensive, and it's pretty easy to use. It's actually very, very easy to use. And so you can buy a day pass, and the great thing about the day pass is it'll also let you use the ferry to get across to Miyajima Island, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But certainly, the ferry is a great thing to do. And I'm just trying to remember offhand what it cost. I'm trying to find my sort of notes here in terms of what it cost. But the pass is called the Hiroshima Omitenashi Pass, or HOP, H-O-P. It's the Hiroshima Electric Railway streetcar. It's a day trip, and they also have discount coupons as well to various hotels, etc. And then you can also get the Hiroshima Electric Railway. You can buy the one-day trip card, or you can buy individual fares as well. And you can buy the passes at the main train station that I was mentioning. So if you're coming in on the bullet train, the main train station, the information desk, but a lot of the hotels will also sell it, and often you'll find on the train as well, and the actual trains themselves, you can also buy the pass. So pretty easy to get. I mean, as I said, Hiroshima, they're very proud of the tramway system, and they do encourage people to use it, and it is pretty easy to use. So in terms of some overall tips for travelers, let me talk about those. In all of the podcasts I've done about Japan, I've often mentioned the same sort of watch outs. The people are incredibly friendly, very welcoming, very mixed understanding of English. So it's a good idea to perhaps learn a few key words, like good day is konnichiwa, goodbye is sayonara, thank you is arigato, please is kudasai. I think I pronounced that correctly. So just learning a couple of words. But people are very friendly, very welcoming. They'll certainly try and help you. And the Japanese generally are so lovely and so kind and so welcoming and so helpful, and will really go out of the way to welcome you. In terms of etiquette, Japan is quite strict in some of the things they do. So don't throw rubbish about, don't eat and drink while walking, avoid blowing your nose in public ideally. And one of the tips is with toilets is, the great thing about Japan and Hiroshima is there's toilets everywhere. There's public toilets everywhere. They are fantastic at public toilets, and a lot of them will have music playing in them. They have some of the very zooty types which will make sounds of flushing to cover noise. Some toilets will have music in, but also you will also find in many of the toilets you go to is you'll have the very technical ones, but you'll also have the sort of the hole in the floor. So you have those kind of extremes, but certainly it's great in terms of very clean and lots of public toilets. So let me now go into the must-see and do's in Hiroshima. Now, as I've already mentioned a couple of times, is you do need to see the parts linked to the atomic bomb, but there is more to see, so I'm going to talk about those. But it is a very important one, and I'm guessing that one of the reasons that a lot of people will come to Hiroshima as a tourist is to understand some of the story behind the atomic bomb. So first thing to talk about, and probably the most important thing to visit, is the Peace Memorial Park area. And this is quite a big area. and it's surrounded on two sides by two rivers, one of which is called the Honkawa River, and the other one, which I'll pronounce really badly, is the Motosai-gawa River. But basically you have this stretch of land. It's not quite a triangular shape, but it's sort of like an elongated triangular shape with the water going all around it and a couple of bridges across to it. But the Peace Memorial Park, it was built as a commemorative facility, part of that Hiroshima Peace Memorial City Construction Law, which was brought in 1948. And the idea was to make the whole neighborhood as a symbol of peace, but also to make it a recreation park. So it's designed to be a very calm place, to symbol peace, and to really be hopeful about peace. And there's a couple of very significant things in here, like the A bomb dome, which I'll talk about, and the museum, which I will talk about in a little more detail. So basically in this park, which is lots of trees, lots of walkways, across the river, you've got the atomic bomb dome. Now the atomic bomb dome was a building which was very severely damaged and very burnt by the bomb. It was actually quite close to the epicenter of the bomb, and it's now this ruined building, which was originally a city council building, and it's got a dome on it. And what they've done is basically spend a lot of time making sure that they keep it stable and upright. So one of the things you might find is there's often maybe scaffolding or work to basically protect, because it's basically an exposed building to the elements. It's the shell of what used to be called the Industrial Promotion Hall. The hall itself was built in 1914, and it has been preserved. And as I mentioned, there's quite a lot of work on it. At night, it's also very beautiful because it's floodlit. And what you'll also see a lot around the A-Dome is the origami cranes. Now, you may not know the story of the cranes, but it pops up in quite a few places whenever it's linked to the atomic bombs, both here and in Nagasaki. But there was a young girl who from Hiroshima that had been affected by the nuclear fallout, and basically I think had leukemia and was dying. But she believed that if she folded 1,000 origami cranes that she would survive. However, she never got to do 1,000. She died before she'd done that. So what a lot of school parties do, sometimes international groups do, is they bring these garlands of 1,000 cranes and will leave them at some significant places, like the atomic bomb dome. Also, when I talk about in the podcast, if you listen to the podcast in Nagasaki, at the Atomic Bomb Museum there, and also at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum. So you'll find a lot of these beautiful garland cranes everywhere. So that's one of the most important things to see, and one of the things that certainly if you're on a tour or if you go on the river cruise or whatever, that it will always go past the actual atomic bomb dome, and it's an image that you will instantly recognize. It's very, very significant. The other thing in the park, now in this park itself, I'm actually looking at a little brochure here. There's something like 67 different monuments within this park. So there's a huge amount to see in the park. So I'm going to focus on some of the really important ones. But there are everything from, for example, the monument of the Hiroshima District Lumber Corporation. There's the Peace Clock Tower. There is the monument dedicated to Korean victims and survivors. There's the monument for the Volunteer Army Corps. There's a statue of the Merciful Mother. There's the monument to former South Tenchimachi area. There's a Gates of Peace. There's a Friendship Monument. There's a statue of a prayer for peace. There's a flame of peace. There's just so many things in here. So basically, as you wander around, you'll see all these things. And one of the things that's a good tip to do is to pick up the Welcome to Hiroshima sightseeing guide map, and you'll find those at either the Tourist Information Center, or you can get it at many of the hotels will have it, often in the airport. you'll find it, or if you're coming in on a cruise, you'll pick it up in the the cruise, and you come out the cruise terminal, you'll find that handing out. And I think I mentioned things like hotels, the airport, etc., etc. You'll find that there. It's the Hiroshima sightseeing guide map, and I'll also put a link in the show notes to the website, which is Hiroshima-navi.or.jp. That's the sort of official Hiroshima Convention and Visitors Bureau. But one of the things I strongly recommend is have this little brochure there as you walk around and see these various monuments and statues, etc., because there are so many of them. So you've got the atomic bomb dome. One of the other most significant things there is the Hiroshima National Peace Memorial Hall for the atomic bomb victims. And this was a facility that was built to pay tribute to everyone who died directly or following on from the atomic bomb. And it's where people will pray for peace. And its objective is to really hand down the memory of all the people that died. And what you can see here is there are names and portraits, photographs of various victims and memoirs. There's some videos of survivors, and that's a very moving thing to go to. And that's sort of about halfway between the atomic bomb dome if you're walking from the top of the park down towards the Memorial Museum. But it's quite moving, and it's probably a little bit distressing in some ways for people. The other thing which is also worth seeing is the bell. There's a very beautiful bell which you can actually ring, which is the peace bell, and that is as you go. If you're going to look at the atomic bomb dome across the river, which is the main view, sort of just behind you is the actual bell, and you'll find a lot of people go and ring it. It's a very beautiful bell indeed. So if you then walk down, so you're walking from the top of the park where the atomic bomb dome is, and then walk and head down to the Peace Memorial Museum. Now, the Peace Memorial Museum is it's a very critical site. It's also known as the A-bomb Museum. As itself, it's not designed to be particularly architecturally significant. It's a series of 3 buildings, so it's quite a large museum, and it tries to give a balanced picture of the history behind the atrocity, what happened, the after effects. There's a model showing the extent of all the damage. It really is it's definitely worth going to. It also tells you the history, and it also does a rallying cry. A lot of its objective is to rally and encourage people to focus on the elimination of nuclear weapons. There were some renovations going on in 2016, so depending on when you're listening to this or going to this, hopefully it's all reopened again. So the East Building was under renovation and closed, and they were moving some of the displays, etc. around. But that's definitely worth going to. Strongly recommend that. So, but as I said, you can spend quite a lot of time strolling around the Peace Memorial Park because there is a lot to see within the actual Memorial Park itself. So then, that's probably the main focus for exploring and looking at the whole atomic bomb part. Let's talk about some of the other things to do. Now, I mentioned earlier on in the podcast the Hiroshima Castle. So its official name is the Hiroshima-jo Castle. The castle you go and see is not the original. It's a rebuilt version of it. It has a museum about the Edo period, which is the period up until before sort of Japan was really sort of united, and the capital moved to Tokyo. But it's definitely a beautiful castle. It was originally built in 1589. A lot of it was destroyed through through history and rebuilding, etc. But it was largely wiped out by the atomic bomb. So it was rebuilt in 1958. It was rebuilt in concrete. It's pretty much, it's still a very impressive thing to do. There's some really great displays, some videos about it, and it is worth going to. So you just need to bear in mind it's not the original, and they've done a pretty good job at recreating the look and the feel and the scale of it. And I would really recommend going to have a look at that. And certainly the actual exhibitions are great, and within the walls there's also a really great shrine, which is the Gokoku Shrine. So it's definitely a great thing to do. Now let me talk a little bit about some of the museums. And what's interesting about the museums is they've really opened in more recent times. So since the 1960s, there's a couple of museums have opened. One of the most popular is the Hiroshima Prefectural Art Museum, which was opened in 1968. And this is really worth a visit. There's an incredible painting by a man called Hirayama Iku. I think that's how you pronounce it, Ikuo. And he was an artist living in the city when the bomb was dropped, and he's done this incredible painting called Holocaust at Hiroshima, and that's a big draw for people. But they have some other things in here, like Salvador Dali's Dreams of Venus. But the Hiroshima Prefectural Art Museum, very popular, strongly recommend going to see that. In 1978, the Hiroshima Museum of Art opened, which is also a great museum if you're into art, particularly French Renaissance. And then there is a much more recent museum, which was opened in 1989, which is the Hiroshima City Museum of Modern Art. So if you're into art, there are some really beautiful museums with some very beautiful artwork and quite sort of eclectic. As you see, you've got French Renaissance, modern art, etc. So, you've got the Peace Park, which is very sobering. You've got the Hiroshima-jo Castle, although it's not the original, but get a sense of ancient Hiroshima. And you've got these very beautiful museums, art museums. There's also some quite interesting and slightly more quirky museums, and they're all transport related. I mentioned to you earlier on that Hiroshima is a big industrial center and also a big sort of maritime and port center. So there's a couple of very interesting museums. One of those, particularly if you're into cars, is not far outside the city, is the Mazda Museum. Mazda, obviously the car makers, and they showcase in here the company's technology about making cars, and they have a very interesting displays of the Mazda line dating sort of right back through the ages, which is very interesting. You've also got the Hiroshima City Transport Museum, which has got over 2,000 vehicles from all around the world. So that's also a great museum. So particularly if you're into cars, etc., that's a great museum to go to. Then there's two maritime-related ones. There's the JMSDF, which is the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force Kure Museum, which has got a submarine in, so that also tells a lot of the history around sort of the military link with Hiroshima that I mentioned. And then you have the Yamato Museum, which has scale models of battleships, fighter planes, that kind of stuff. So you have these great maritime museums within Hiroshima. So you've got art, you've got transport, you've got maritime. Now, a couple of other great things to do before I talk about Miyajima is the Shukai-en Gardens. Now, the Shukkei-en Garden, it's very beautiful, and it's a great sort of antidote, if you like, to the sobering sense of the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park. These are very beautiful gardens. They've got some tea houses in them. It's on the banks of the Koboshigawa River, and the garden was originally laid out in 1630. And it was designed. It's very Chinese inspired. So it's an interesting garden because it's very Chinese inspired, and it was originally modeled to resemble the Xinu Lake in Hangzhou, I think that's how you pronounce it, in China. So it's a it's a very beautiful, very popular gardens. That's the Shukai-en Gardens. Now, what I'd like to talk about is another major attraction for Hiroshima is Miyajima. Miyajima is a very sacred island. Its name, it basically means Shrine Island, and it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So I mentioned there was two UNESCO World Heritage Sites, one which was the A-Dome, the other is Miyajima Island. So it's just across in the bay. You use a ferry to get there, and it's got this beautiful shrine, the Grand Gate, which is set slightly off from the island, facing towards Hiroshima. And so when the tide's in, it looks like it's literally floating in the middle of the bay, and that's become a very great symbol. And behind it you have these beautiful green, very lush green, densely packed hills, sort of mountains with packed tight with trees. But as you use the ferry, so you have that great Torii, the sea entrance to the shrine. when it's low tide, I mentioned what it looked like when it was high tide. When it's low tide, you can actually walk. You should normally be able to walk right up to it as well, but it's great seeing it when it's high tide and just sort of floating there. So often if you go to many of the shrines, and they have these Torii gates in Japan, they're always there, and then there's normally sort of land and ground that you walk up to the shrine, but here there's water. It's very beautifully done. So within the Miyajima Island, within the sort of the complex, so as you first come through the Torii Gate, there's a complex. There's much more on the island, but there's a complex of a couple of things to see. And the most important things to see is the shrine itself, so the Itsukumisha shrine. And the shrine was very ancient. It dates right back to 593. It's all built on stilts. And as I mentioned, again, it's great when the tide's in because all these buildings are reflected. And so you get this great reflection into the water. So it's a very beautiful sight. Another significant thing is the 5-story pagoda. You know, it's very traditional Japanese pagodas with the different levels. So this has 5 stories, and it slightly overlooks the shrine itself. It was built right back in 1407, and then just next to it is the Senojaku, I think that's how you pronounce it, a pavilion of 1,000 tatami mats, which dates back to 1587. So you see you have some really ancient stuff in this area. Then on the other side of the shrine, so that's if you're facing the shrine on the left hand side, you've got the 5-story pagoda. On the other side, on the right hand side, is the treasure house, and this is a much more recent building. It was built in 1934, and it houses the collection of gifts presented to the shrine by various patrons, including the Tara clan, should I say. So that's also very, very interesting. If you want to spend more time on Miyajima Island, there are some nature trails which go up Mount Misen, which is behind the shrine, and there's actually a cable car which goes up to the summit of Mount Misen. There's great, beautiful views, nature trails, that kind of stuff. And the website, if you want to find out more, is visit-miyajima-japan.com, and I will also put that in the show notes as well if you want to find out more about Miyajima. It's a very beautiful place to go, very easy to get to. It's on the ferry from Hiroshima. It's quite magnificent. So again, it's a very nice contrast to some of the sort of more sobering parts of Hiroshima. So if you want to go even further afield, one of the things you can do, which is a great thing to do, and it's something I did actually out of Hiroshima, is I got the bullet train to Kintai Bridge, which is at Shin Iwakuni, and it's rated as one of Japan's 3 most beautiful bridges. It's 700 feet long. It's got 5 arches. It was built in 1673, and it's on a very fast-flowing river. Although it depends when the river's is sort of in flood. And they had to try and design a bridge that wouldn't get washed away. But it's a very beautiful bridge with these arches, and just next to it is a fascinating thing called Kiko Park. This was once the residence of a sort of warlord or shogun, I think that they're called, and his name was Daimo Kikiawa, hence Kiko Park. He's the one who got the bridge built, but there's lots of examples of genuine samurai buildings. There's some great gardens in there. There's a lovely shrine, and you can actually catch a cable car up to the mountain with a great viewpoint. It's about a 15-minute ride out on the bullet train. That's something I'd strongly recommend going to see, because again, around Japan, because of the Second World War, there are lots of places where there's not a lot of genuine old stuff. So that's why, like I spoke about with the Hiroshima-jo Castle, which is a reconstruction, going to see some of these original buildings is fantastic. So hopefully that's giving you a good sense of Hiroshima. So there's definitely more than just the atomic bomb stuff, but that has to be a major focal point. You've got the castle, you've got some really interesting museums, you've got the Shukai-en Gardens, and a real absolute must is Miyajima. So if you are going to Hiroshima and you're only going to do 2 things, I would say go to Miyajima, and also make sure that, of course, you go to the Peace Park. So that's all I have for you on Hiroshima. Hopefully that's given you some good information, give you some advice, give you some tips, give you some inspiration. If this is the first time you've listened to the podcast, thank you very much. I'd love if you subscribed. If you have listened to it once, twice, 100 times, please, it'd also be great if you did a rating and left a review. It's good for feedback, but also it helps enormously other people to find the podcast, which of course is great for me to help to spread the word and make it even more worthwhile for me doing this podcast. To make that easier, I've done some short codes. So the easy way of doing that is just so you don't have to remember the complicated codes. If you just remember tipsfortravelers.com, and travelers are spelled with 2 L's. So tipsfortravelers.com/iTunes TFT. TFT standing for Tips for Travelers. For iTunes, Stitcher TFT. For Stitcher, TuneIn TFT for TuneIn. And Google Play TFT for Google Play. So that's all I have for today. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. And until next time, here's to happy, safe, and wonderful, wonderful travels.